Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick, Sonali Basak here, counting you down to the closing bell, here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast. We're joined right now by Carol Massar and Madison Mills. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio, as well as Bloomberg Originals, and those folks who are still streaming on YouTube. Carol,
yes.
Off the lows of the day.
Yeah.
You're happy. You're excited.
I'm happy because
you're loud. Are you going home?
Got about an hour, and then we get a long weekend. No, what I'm really impressed.
3-day weekend you keep talking about.
I know. I like 3-day weekends.
Yeah.
4-day work week. Anybody listening? Anyway, you've been talking.
It's President's Day on Monday. You know, you're supposed to celebrate.
I like my presidents.
Our presidents.
I mean, I like
All
our
of them.
presidents.
I love how we just have a generic holiday for presidents. That way you can't have any sort of political infighting, right? Because it celebrates them
It's like when they have a group birthday. I want my own day. What I think is interesting, you talked a lot about the small caps earlier. I mean, the S&P 500 on track for another down week, 2 in a row here. First, that we'd see that in 2023. But small caps, right? Maddie, continue. Romaine talked about this earlier. Continuing to see some outperformance.
Yeah, look at the Russell 2000 on the day. I want to say it's up by 2% on the day?
0.2%.
0.2%, rather. Yes. Thank you for that, Carol. But really interesting to see, though. We just had a guest on Bloomberg Business Week Radio who said, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Make sure you're still diversifying, Sonali. So interesting to monitor all of these moves today.
Before we get to the closing bells, I just do want to give us an update here on that outage that we have been seeing at John F. Kennedy Airport here in New York City. The Port Authority is now saying that they do plan to reopen with limited operations at JFK Terminal 1 on Saturday. So tomorrow. Remember, so far we've had about 39 flights canceled on this Friday afternoon as a result of that electrical outage from yesterday here. Again, this is the International Terminal, Terminal 1 at JFK in New York City. All right, let's get right to the closing bells here. Our Dow Jones Industrial Average, you got green on the screen there, up about 130 points on the day, about 0.4% as we wait for these numbers to settle. We should point out on a weekly basis, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is fractionally lower on the week, only by about 0.1%. S&P going to close lower by about 0.3% on the day, similar 0.3% on the week, and the NASDAQ Composite is actually going to close down 0.6% on the day, and it's higher by about 0.6% on the week. Go figure. Russell 2000, that's your outperformer here on the day and on the week, up 0.2%.
Love those small caps. All right, let's talk about the semiconductor index because it's down about 1.6%. So, Sonali, I know you're going to get into the groups overall, but we definitely saw some underperformance in that group in today's trade.
Yeah, let's talk about underperformance because we're looking at the energy index down on the S&P more than anything else, more than 3.6% down on the day. You're followed by semis. Remember, that is a trade that you saw a lot of funds get back into. Semis down more than 1.6%. Tough way to end the week. You're having some green on the screen. You have autos, telecom services, food and beverage, retail, utilities up 1% or more on the day. But again, Monday is a holiday, so let's see what next week has to bring.
That's a good point, right? We'll start a new week off. Let's get, though, to some of the specific gainers in today's session. We've talked about this a lot. The farm area, specifically ag equipment, and we're talking about Deere. It was the #1 gainer in the S&P 500, up about 7.5% in today's session. Really raised the group, some of the other players in that space. Top maker of ag machinery, analysts positive on the company after it reported first quarter results that beat expectations. The company also raising its forecast. So that's certainly a standout. DraftKings, did you guys talk to Jason Robbins?
We did talk to Jason Robbins.
Yeah, so interesting. That stock, man, on a tear this year and today, up 15%. It's up about 80% so far here in 2023.
You know what I thought was interesting about not only our conversation with them, but also the earnings, was the focus on costs and cost discipline more, if you will. And that seemed to be what really pleased a lot of folks.
All right. Well, that's a really important thing, right, for a company, especially if you're getting into a market or outlook that maybe some might be concerned about. Company did, by the way, DraftKings reported fourth quarter revenue. It was better than expected, and they raised guidance for fiscal year 2023. So some outlook there. HubSpot, also an outperformer, up almost 12% in today's session. Software company gave a forecast for adjusted earnings much stronger than expected. And then you had the analysts weighing in. They were positive about the company's execution, my favorite corporate speak word. Also, the company's ability to drive growth in a tough macro environment. Maddie, what do you got?
Well, I've got our decliners on the day, and I guess I should mention the S&P 500 in this group posting its first 2-week losing streak since December 30th, meaning the first 2-week losing streak of this year so far. So I'm going to go into the biggest decliner in the S&P today. It's energy. Take a look at Devon Energy, down by about 4.2% on the day. The shale giant planning to spend more to get less in this coming year. One analyst on the earnings earlier this week said their spending looks hot, production is looking light, and that spending is hitting across the board in this sector. I want to also take a look at Apache, down by about 5% on the day. And then if we look at crude oil, also down by 2.8%, crude extending losses with those swelling U.S. inventories, Romaine.
All right, of course, we go back and to look at some of the big moves that we saw this week in the Treasury space here. A bit of a repricing when it comes to yields. We did see the yields on the 2-year actually slightly lower here on the day, but on a weekly basis, still up by about 10 basis points. You add that to 23 basis points last week, and I think it was 10 basis points the week before that here. And you see a pretty dramatic move coming off roughly about 4% to now 4.6. A 10-year yield had a similar move on the day and on the week, up at around 3.8% here. And the rest of the space here across the curve right now camped out in that 4% range, guys. And that really brings us to, I think, what we're seeing in the swaps market, which is the repricing, of course, of Fed expectations, which across the board, I was running the work function, and I thought this was interesting. You take any contract around any meeting, so the March meeting, May meeting, June, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, pricing now at 5% or more. That's a complete flip-flop from where we were just 3 or 4 weeks ago when all the pricing was at 5% or below.
Yeah, no, that's a significant change and a downgrade, right, when it comes to the odds of any kind of rate cuts, right? So what a switch in terms of the tone and sentiment here, Sonali.
You know, the thing about it, though, I don't think the market has fully absorbed what that means for things to be a little higher for longer, because the big question is for how much longer? When you have that trajectory in which the expectations have increased time after time, when does it end?
Well,
that's the question.
Well, and the thing is, too, I mean, you think about what's the next catalyst for this market, up or down. I mean, we have a few earnings, which you've talked about, like Walmart, Home Depot. But also there's a lot of economic data. You get the PMI data coming out. There's a big PCE report a week from today, that monthly number, where you'll get a read on spending, but also, of course, that deflator, the PCE deflator, which is, of course, the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation.
We got a lot of big news coming next week in terms of data. Personal consumption, GDP annualized quarter over quarter, initial jobless claims, continuing claims, and then we've got, of course, some of those consumer-driven earnings reports coming out from Walmart and Home Depot as well.
And you know what else, Carol, is coming out this week? And I'm doing this just for you. I forgot to mention this earlier, but you know, all the Chinese tech companies, I think about you from time to time, only 4 days a week.
Okay.
But all the big Chinese tech companies are reporting next week. So you're in Alibaba, Baidu, I think they're kicking off. I'm curious to see what we hear out of them, given the big rally that we had to start the year, which has kind of petered out over the last 3 weeks.
Well, I was thinking about the story that was among the most read on the Bloomberg about a missing Chinese executive, right?
Yeah,
in the investment.
yeah.
Exactly. And I do wonder that that's just a reminder that we still know that the Chinese market and the Chinese officials, it can continue to surprise us. And that certainly impacts the trade of those ADRs here in the United States, but also just generally global market sentiment.
Yeah, for a short week, we have some interesting U.S. information coming out next week, too. We're going to look at GDP revisions. We're going to look at existing home sales and existing, retail earnings. We have earnings ahead of us that, honestly, guys, this is a market in search of a bull case. Will they get it, is what I wonder.
How many times, Maddie, is James Bullard scheduled to speak next week?
Ooh, that's a good pop quiz for me, Romaine. What do we have
I don't
next
know,
week?
Romaine. How many times is Mr. Bullard going to speak?
I don't know. It was a rhetorical question. But thanks for playing along, Carol Massar.
You know what? JP Morgan reports earnings on April 14th.
There we go.
I already started to look at that. Hey,
What?
did you guys see the story?
I got to put it on my calendar.
Did you guys see the story? The biggest earners may not be the smartest workers.
I did see that story. That was a good one.
What are you implying, Carol?
I'm not saying anything. Take it wherever you want to take it.
Interesting that you would
No
single that
comment.
out to end the week here. I did not see that story. I'll have to keep an eye on it here.
I'll share it with you.
Yeah. You know what else I'm also interested in, too? I know you guys probably don't care, but the bidding on Manchester United. You've been following that?
I care. I'm following that closely. Because, it's interesting. You're starting to see sovereign wealth really start to get into the European football game, where, doesn't that give U.S. private equity a run for their money?
And I think this was supposed to be the deadline for the bids, and I think the latest Bloomberg report is that, the Qataris are, something around like $6 billion US bucks that they could be potentially bid.
Well, I think, the Middle East increasingly thinking about maybe their PR image globally and moving increasingly into sports. I think it's a really interesting move, and especially if we continue to see it pick up some momentum.
It is, and you have to remember that when you're looking at sovereign wealth and when you're looking at private equity across the globe, these are marquee private assets. And frankly, if you look at what's happening with the sales you're seeing in, American basketball or even American football, you are seeing people experience soaring valuations in sports. We were talking about ESPN and a potential relationship with DraftKings a little earlier. Let's see what the streaming wars do for the valuation of these companies.
Big money, business of sports.
Totally.
Romaine, before we go, I've got to ask you, favorite president?
I'm not going there. Favorite president, all of them.
I really want to know. Might ask in the commercial break.
There's a lot that aren't around. They're not going to be
favorites.
upset if you don't say their name.
Yeah.
All right, guys, have a good long weekend. Really appreciate it. That's a wrap for our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, and of course, Bloomberg Originals. Beyond the Bell is what we call it. Have a good weekend, everybody, and we will see you, the team, back here on Tuesday.